Hi, I'm Debbie Georgatos. Welcome to my show, America, Can We Talk? Today, we're going to talk about Seattle is cleaning out Chaz, or CHOP. Nonie Darwish joins me to talk about her books and what's happening in America. A woke Harvard Caucasity student, you won't believe what she had to say. And finally, a climate advocate apologizes for the climate scare. And of course, I'll tell you why these stories matter to you. Stay tuned.
Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk, is an author, attorney, and political analyst whose mission is to inspire the American political conversation about preserving liberty in the best country on earth.
And hello again. Welcome to America Can We Talk. I'm Debbie Georgatos, and welcome to today's First Five. We've been talking about the situation in Seattle where we had, I like to call them domestic terrorists, but Antifa, Black Lives Matter people took over a small segment of the city of Seattle and simply were trying to declare it as an autonomous zone, a zone they own, they control. Autonomous zone being language actually very significant in the Antifa extreme communist movement that is now taking hold in America. Autonomous zone, the name chosen by them for a reason that it signifies their connection to the extreme danger of this communist movement. But in Seattle, finally, we had the Seattle mayor finally decide, you know what, this isn't just the greatest idea after all. So she today ordered to clear out the encampment, the zone taken over by the Antifa terrorists. So I have two clips to show you. One is clip one. Matt has that. So you see, first of all, they had actually set up a little community. It isn't just a few people in this Chaz CHOP area of Seattle who were, blocking off a few streets. They tried to make it a real community, tried to really be in charge, tried to fine people who live in the community for not doing what they said, set up little shopping areas, little vendor type things. So the first clip we just saw, police moving in, and you can see how many police is taking to overtake this area in Seattle. We also have clip two. Matt can show you that.
Okay, don't talk to us, please. We're moving here.
Straight, temper, watch your eyes.
Go left, go left.
I cut out of that, just so you know, I cut out of that. It was a very lengthy clip that I could have showed you today. There were a lot of the protesters. You saw, first of all, how many police it took. Second of all, how these protesters, and I don't even want to call them protesters. Protesting is a legitimate First Amendment activity. When you follow the law, you march in a certain area you've been permitted to march in, you carry your signs, you have speeches. These are simply terrorists taking over segments of America. But as the police arrived, it took literally, as you see, dozens of police to even clear one street, and there was one of the protesters, one of the rioters, one of the communist Antifa people bellowing, yelling. He was filming the police at the same time yelling, F-bombs flying, very foul language, yelling at the police, essentially trying to tell them to go away, that they shouldn't be there. The police had to be, as you can see, they had not locked arms, very close, en masse, marching down the street. You have a lot of the protesters challenging them, yelling at them, telling them, you go away, I want to see your badge number, all these idiotic things. And I want to say, the reason I wanted to share this in the First Five today is this. It was bad enough that it took the Seattle mayor, whatever it has been, weeks to close out this encampment, this intrusion into a otherwise sovereign area, an area of America in Seattle, which does not belong to them. It's bad enough it took her that long, but what you saw in the conduct of those people, the Antifa, Black Lives Matter terrorists who took over that area, is defiance. You didn't see any sense of them saying, okay, well, you know, we were trying to make a political point and we just overstayed our welcome a little too long, just trying to make a point that we demand X, you know, we want Y. None of that. These people are serious. You've got to understand this about the Antifa movement in this country. It is not simply a few wild-haired, long-haired, irresponsible young people. It is a mindset. It is a movement rooted in, if you watched the show a few weeks ago, we had a fabulous guest explaining, Kyle Scheidler, explaining the depth of thinking in the Antifa movement, how it's been around since Hitler's days. It is a communist movement. It is a terrorist, fascist movement, and it has taken hold in America. So finally, in Seattle, you had it cleaned out by the mayor, and actually it appears only this mayor took action, this Democrat mayor in Seattle took action, because they began to have actual crime, as in murders, killing people inside the zone. Still, these communist rioters were not going to let the police in, did not want to let anyone in to help, even after people were being murdered. You had police reporting there are rapes occurring, rapes inside this area, and we can't get in response to calls because Antifa said we can't come there. So this whole idea, folks, that we're beginning a summer of unrest, or maybe we're in the middle of a summer of unrest, is not unrest as usual. It is not the same thing as protests in other times in America where you had people rising up protesting for or against something. This is a very dangerous movement in this country. Antifa is locked with the Black Lives Matter movement. Not every single person who is participating in Black Lives Matter protests is part of Antifa, but the organization itself, BLM, Black Lives Matter, run by Marxists with a Marxist agenda, the takeover of America, the destruction of America, signs put out that outside for the public to see outside that Chaz area in Seattle included things like there's definitely hatred of Jews. There's also advocacy to end capitalism, to bring socialism or communism, to denounce capitalism as the reason for racism in this country. Is idiotic, no logic to them at all, but everything this Antifa group was talking about, far bigger than the horrible death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. It is a movement to change and take over America. Finally, the Seattle mayor ordered the police and they finally took over. They, by the way, had a similar thing in Portland. Last night, the police had to move in Portland area to clear out a crowd that was trying to replicate. They've been trying for several days now, but last night was kind of a big blow up. The people in Portland, Antifa types, had also decided they were going to take over some segment of Portland, and the police greeted their presence with tear gas. I don't think anyone was killed. They certainly had some injuries and scuffles, but they had the people of Portland apparently learning a lesson from the people of Seattle. But I raise all this to say, and I'm going to close out the first five by saying this. This country has always had, for decades, maybe since our founding, but certainly for decades, extreme anti-American elements inside our country, anti-American elements who simply do not believe in the idea of America as founded, do not believe in the idea of America as founded. Communists in this country since the 1920s, the communist movement we're talking about in this show several times, figured out early on they could not convince the American people living in abundance, prosperity, and freedom how great it would be to convert to socialism and communism. So the communists figured out early on they couldn't convince us with the truth because Americans can see how ugly and undesirable socialism and communism were, and they were saying no. Communist movement decided, okay, we got to take the race angle. We're going to play the race card. We're going to race bait. We're going to claim that our violence in the city streets is not anything about communism or socialism. We're just trying to stand up for racial justice. There was a brilliant book written by a black man in America who joined the communist movement in, I don't even know what years it was, 1920s, 1930s, thought that the communist movement had come to save the black people of America, and soon realized the communists, the socialists, the Antifa people, the predecessors to Antifa, they're just using race as an issue to divide America and is not at all helpful to America. I'm going to wrap up the first five by saying this. There have been anti-American elements in this country for decades. Another anti-American element, another element determined to bring about the destruction of America, has been the element of Islam, radical Islam in America. And that brings me to introducing our next guest. So at the end of the first five, I'm saying, folks, please see these, what we're watching in the streets, the disruption in America, the destruction of property, the arson, the murders. Please see it in the bigger context of an attack on the very idea of America as founded. And this, my very fine friends, is today's First Five. As I said at the start of the show, we have a guest joining us. We have her on the phone, Nonie Darwish. She has joined us in the past. She is first of all, a great friend. But second, in introducing her, I want to just mention just a little bit about her background before we get to bring her on. First of all, she was not born in America. She was born in Egypt. She lived a portion of her childhood in Egypt, a portion of her childhood living in Gaza. She came to America in 1978, came with her husband in 1978, and she is therefore an amazing amazing observer of what drew her to America, what the changes she sees in America over the decades since she's been here. She's watching the destruction of the peace in our cities, watching the violence and destruction in our cities. And she came to America in part because she wanted to have a freer life than the life she had in Egypt. She grew up under Islam. She converted to Christianity, and now she's here in America. She's the author of numerous books. She's just a national treasure, but author of numerous books. One's called Now They Call Me Infidel, Why I Renounce Jihad for America. I got to tell you, that was a very moving book. I can't urge you strong enough to read it. Now They Call Me Infidel, one book. Cruel and Unusual Punishment, The Terrifying Global Implications of Islamic Law. She wrote The Devil We Don't Know, The Dark Side of Revolutions in the Middle East. And finally, Wholly, as in W-H-O-L-L-Y, Wholly Different, Why I Chose Biblical Values over Islamic Values. She has been active in the movement to awaken America to understand the threat of Islamic jihad in America, the threat of cultural jihad, civilization jihad. She's got some great observations about where we are today in America. So, without further ado, I believe we have Nonie Darwish on the phone. There she is. There's your picture.
Hi, Debbie. Hi, Debbie.
Hi, Nonie. Great to hear your voice. Great to have you. So,
my pleasure to be with you today.
So glad you could join us. So I'm going to just start with, Nonie, you know, you have been very active trying to write about and to awaken America to the potential threat of Islamic jihad in this country, not necessarily in a violent military form, but in civilizational, cultural jihad, the various the turning of America away from the ideas that are founding the Christian values of our country. And so now we're in the middle of 2020, literally pretty much the middle of 2020, July 1st, and we're watching horrible violence in the American streets, and we're seeing some kind of similar demands from the protesters we're watching around this country and the demands of Islamic jihad in terms of bringing more totalitarian mindset, bringing a more destructive of America mindset. So let me just start with, if you would, tell us your overall impressions of what is driving these movements we're watching in this country, the destruction in the cities, Antifa. Do you see connections between that and the Islamic mindset?
Absolutely. Marxism has united with Islamism now. So we are seeing a Marxist movement in America that is very much influenced by Islamic tactics. And like you said, I agree with you that every society, even America at its roots, had its people who hated it. So every society has the seeds for its own destruction. And America now is a shining example to the world of those seeds have grown and have taken over the garden we have lived in called America. The seeds of destruction is now in control. And there are many, many reasons for that, Debbie. It's very sad that I'm seeing the signs so clear to me, because I did live under tyranny, so I'm especially very sensitive to this, what's happening today, and I'm very surprised that many Americans are just looking the other way, ignoring what's happening. Some Americans are apologizing to the Black Lives Matter kissing their feet, which is a very sad sign. It reminds me of how many, when I lived in the Middle East, how many ordinary people just kiss the feet of the Muslim Brotherhood just to keep them keep them safe to live. The tyranny was so hard that truly some people supported the Muslim Brotherhood just so they can leave them alone. So this is happening in America, but under a different name. Tyranny comes under many different names, and today it's called it's called Black Lives Matter, and it's also the group the other group,
Antifa.
Antifa, exactly. But really, Black Lives Matter is just a pretty name to bring together Antifa with the disgruntled, oppressed, maybe unhappy black youth in America. Instead of giving them a way to how to prosper, how to improve their lives, they are telling them, let's go have a revolution and against America. So they're bringing together, and there's a lot of white youth in these groups who are just as rebellious as the young black group. So it's not. I'm looking at the faces, and it's not a strictly black group at all.
Go right ahead. Go ahead.
It's very sad to see that the most sad part for me is I see the ordinary American looking at this and just walking the other way and looking the other way, like this is it's going to be okay. They don't see that their way of life will never be the same again, and I see that. I see that this mayor of Seattle is just a product of generations of hating patriarchy and the family unit. This feminist movement, threw away the father from the family, like throwing the baby with the bathwater. They threw the father with the bathwater, and the end result is a family unit headed by a woman who cannot control these young youth alone by herself. And I understand that it's a very tricky. They think, they idealize these single women almost like they are. They can never be wrong. And they have burdened these women. They've told them, you don't need a man. Here's $500 from the government a month. You don't need a man. And they have failed these women. They have really hurt them. And now they have all these kids, and not only boys and girls. You've seen what the girls are doing on the streets, just like boys. They're jumping. Those girls are jumping on the hoods of the police cars. And they are going into fights with men, physical fights.
Yep.
But I have never seen that in the worst days of a riot in the Middle East. I have never seen this stomping on police cars anywhere in the world with our politicians telling the police, if you touch them, you're at fault. This is the result of replacing the father in the home with a mother who cannot do her job alone.
Nonie, you've touched on, I got to jump in. You've touched on so many points. I want to, before we get off, I'm so grateful that you were available today. One thing you mentioned, I want to be sure to really hone in on or focus on a moment. I know when you've talked about in America, you've tried to raise the alarm bell about Islam and Islamic jihad and cultural jihad, and people who try to talk about those things are accused of being Islamophobic. So people back down. So I don't want to be labeled Islamophobic, so I'm just going to pretend that the Islamization of America isn't happening, or somehow we'll get past it. It's the same thing watching the violence and tyranny at the hands of the rioters and the Black Lives Matter movement, Antifa. People say, well, I don't want to be called racist, so I'm just going to pretend somehow if all of this, because it's the same tactic the Islamists use as the very aggressive Antifa people use. You're labeled a racist if you criticize, you're labeled Islamophobe. It's an astonishing silencing of the spirit of the American people and the right of the American people to speak up. That was a great, great point you made. And I'd love to have you address that again, just the idea that we're being silenced because we're afraid of being called names.
Absolutely, and you know that it's very similar to the Middle East. In the Middle East, to silence people, they call them infidels. So you're an infidel, and if you speak openly, or you say the truth, or you object to something, then you're an infidel. So everybody in the Middle East cannot speak the truth because they're scared of being called an enemy of Allah, or you're an infidel. So the same thing is happening in America, but the word is not infidel, it's racist. And it doesn't really matter what the, boogie word is. And that's why I hate this word racist in America, because this word is going to be responsible for the destruction of our freedom of speech. And it has succeeded. Nobody wants to be called a racist. And when I was, when I spoke on college campuses, there was a couple of very leftist white students who go, "Oh, but that's racist, what you're saying." So I told them, you don't ever scare me by saying you're racist. You think I'm going to be scared like Americans? I was born in a culture where slavery was a human right. And you are telling me you think I'm going to be scared of being called a racist? You have all your you don't have the order of your priorities straightened up. You don't even know where the problems in the world are. And I really felt bad for these kids. They were defending the Muslim Brotherhood, which was oppressing everybody, including women. And speaking against them in America, I'm being called a racist. So I told them, I don't care about that word, and you can call me whatever you want. And I believe that you're the one who's a racist if you're so focused on race like that.
Nonie, that is such a good point, and I'm glad, I want to segue to talk a little bit about the Muslim Brotherhood. I love your observations about this whole phenomenon we're watching in our country, where it's not just that we have to tolerate the violence and we can't arrest people, we can't stop it, we barely can find the bravery to shut down truly violent protests, but you can't even criticize it. And many people, including Republican politicians who ought to be the ones speaking up and saying this has to end, they are silenced by the fear that you were not silenced by. You kept talking, but many Republican politicians, it's too scary. I don't want to be the one called racist. I'm going to let this go, and somehow, hopefully, it'll pass. But I want to turn and ask you something about the Muslim Brotherhood. There is a document, you and I were talking earlier on the phone today, a document that was uncovered, which was the Muslim Brotherhood's plan for Islam to take over America. The explanatory memorandum, discovered in 1991, written by the Muslim Brotherhood, that essentially was their very lengthy game plan, how radical Islam is going to take over America. And it was we're not going to be able to do it militarily, but we're going to do it through the shift in the culture, silencing people who criticize, just kind of shifting America's expectations and understandings of America's goodness. So that was discovered in 1991. I know you've been active talking about Islamization in America. How are we doing? Is the Muslim Brotherhood making progress on their civilization jihad plan?
Actually, their prediction in that memorandum is coming true in a way. They said in their memorandum that we will destroy them, America, by their own hands. And recently, the Ayatollah in Iran said we were saying death to America, but now it's Americans walking in the streets, writing in the streets of America, saying the same thing, death to America. So really, we have to pay attention. What are we doing to our country? And Debbie, I think there is a reason why the Muslim Brotherhood philosophy is winning. It's winning, and we're allowing it. And it's not just the Muslim Brotherhood philosophy, but leftists. The leftists and Islamists are very much in common in many ways. And that's why I wrote an article a couple of years ago saying how Saul Alinsky and Islamism and Sharia are very similar. This is. I have a hunch why the left in America doesn't want to admit we have an inner city problem with the youth. They don't want to admit that. They would rather blame the police than admit that the inner city youth, regardless whether they're white, black, Hispanic, whatever, it doesn't matter. They don't want to admit that we have a problem with the upbringing of our young people. The reason is they have, for 50 years, taken the men out of the home and heavily criticized the patriarchal family, and which led to the failure of the family. And the very obvious failure of the family in America is the gangs, the inner city youth. That is it's so obvious why the matriarchal one parent household, which is usually a woman, has failed. And I believe they would rather blame the police and oppress the police rather than say we have a problem with our youth.
I believe that's true.
And I'm writing an article right now about this topic.
Oh, good. Okay. Nonie, it's interesting what you're talking about. Yesterday in the show, I had Star Parker, who's the founder of Cure, and she works in a different arena, but she's working in different ways to try to bring out, to help the American family come back together again, to try to send the message to low-income communities, especially in her work with Cure in black inner city communities, about the idea that kids need two parents, that the challenges American youth, black Americans face are in large part due to the failure of the family, the destruction of the family, the loss of family structure. And so she's making the same point you are, coming from a different perspective. And I got to tell you, and to your point, Nonie, about the left liking this, the reason the left is really good with, fine with, is just not going to argue about the destruction of the family, because it enables the leftist big government control, tyranny, takeover happen. Because the family structure has fallen apart, you have so much chaos, it enables, in fact, people end up crying out to have big government take over. So the family destruction enables the growth of leftist American tyranny. What do you think about that?
Exactly. And not only that, the leftists benefit by this army of unhappy young people. It's their army to set against us, middle class and working class in America, to make us afraid and to listen to them. Every time they are not happy with us, or we open our mouths, we infidels racist infidels open our mouths against the government to give us maybe less taxes, this or that. They set their little army to riot in the streets so they can shut us out. That's exactly like the Muslim Brotherhood, and I see a lot of parallels here.
Nonie Darwish, I knew you'd have an amazing and really a unique perspective in watching all the violence we've been watching in the streets in our cities, and everyone's trying to figure out how to solve it and what do we have to do to. And your perspective is just just so helpful and so I don't know what word to say, deep. I mean, really aware of the.
Actually, because I lived it, Debbie. I lived it, but under another name, under another purpose, perhaps. But the dynamic is very similar. Every time the ordinary Middle Eastern person comes to the government and say there is too much oppression, this or that, they release these horrible people on the streets to make us just silence and be happy with what we have.
So
the mob.
well said.
They release the mob on you.
They
And
released
I think this is happening in America today. You guys, you middle class Americans want to elect Trump. How dare you? And now we release our little mob and scare the hell out of you, so you can be happy and vote for us.
You're saying this is how the left thinks. Be really clear, because you're a Trump supporter. You're saying what the left is releasing the mob to say, how dare you support Trump, because they want you to not support him next time, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's scaring us, humbling us, rubbing our nose on the ground to scare us into submission. This is all against us who dare vote for the person we want, or dare ask for less taxes, or dare say the family, God and country and the family is important.
Nonie Darwish, you have amazing perspectives. I want to remind our listeners again, first of all, I will tell you, Nonie, I learn more from you, even though I read a lot. I learn more from you in your books, the two especially I want to mention again. The original, the one that I really got me so interested in getting to talk with you. Now They Call Me Infidel, which I think was back from 2004. I'm not sure when that was written. 2004? And then
2004, and it came out 2006, and then 2009, 2011, and 2017, my 4 books.
But the other one I want to commend to our listeners is your most recent one called Wholly Different: Why I Chose Biblical Values Over Islamic Values. I think there are not enough Americans who even recognize extreme difference between the God of the Christian, by the Judeo-Christian scriptures, that what God is like, what people think God is and what therefore man is, versus what people think about God if you have the Islamic teaching from the Quran. Your book laid out so many differences and explained things I think unless you grew up in Islam, you would never even begin to perceive. You wouldn't recognize how differently what the two books say about the nature of God, the nature of man, the nature of your rights, comparing the Bible and the Quran. And your book was brilliantly laying it out. It explains so much about how very different the civilizations were created by Christianity and Islam. Love that book. I really want to commend that one. So, Nonie, if people want to read more about you, I know I mentioned your books. I know is there a website they can go to learn more about you, or are your books the way to learn more about you?
They can find me on Facebook. I have a lot of followers on Facebook, and I post. I make a lot of postings there.
Yes, you do. I love it.
Very quick. Yeah, and I write articles here and there. I don't run a website anymore because I'm slowing down a little bit. But I'm going to write a fifth book, and in that book, I'm going to compare leftism, Saul Alinsky values with Islamic values, and how they are exactly the same.
Oh, that is brilliant. So when can you get this book done, like tomorrow? No, how soon can you get this book done?
Well, I'm telling you, it's already half written, but and I wrote an article called Saul Alinsky, Islam and Radical Law Rules. Radical, his book is called Rules for Radicals.
Yes.
And I wrote the articles, Alinsky, Islam, and Radical Rules. The same thing. The rules are the same. Their values are the same. So I wrote Wholly Different, showing how different biblical values are from Islamic values. And this coming book is going to be about how leftist values, Alinsky values, are the same, almost identical, mirror copy of Islamic values.
That is a brilliant. I cannot wait to read that book. A brilliant idea for just a brilliant pulling together what your life experience has taught you, what your study has taught you. So Nonie Darwish, I cannot thank you enough for joining me. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure, Debbie. You're the best. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you, and we will talk to you again. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really that woman is a fount of brilliant insight from what basically because the life she's lived and what she's studied and learned. Love her books. That sounds like a great new book she has. Two more quick topics today. One is there was a Harvard student. I want to ask Matt the Wonderful to play her very short clip she put up on TikTok, which I don't have, but I found this online. If Matt can play that clip, and I'll tell you a little more about this young lady.
The next person who has the sheer nerve, the sheer entitled Caucasity to say all lives matter, I'm gonna stab you. I'm gonna stab you. And while you're struggling and bleeding out, I'm gonna show you my paper cut and say, my cut matters too.
Okay, I will tell you that young lady, a 17-second little clip, TikTok, she has put out a statement since then because she got a lot of very, very rough pushback and put out a statement saying she was just kidding. She wasn't kidding. But the reason I want to play that clip is to say this. The left in this country has made tremendous progress to the point that that young girl, a senior at Harvard, so she's not uneducated, she's not, a wanderer someplace, she's a senior at Harvard. She actually thinks that she's so enraged about American society, how evil American society is, how we're awash, we're drowning in racism, that it's absurd for anyone to say all lives matter. That's what she's complaining about, that someone would say the term all lives matter. She's saying, if you think that, then you don't understand just that we are drowning in racism in this country. So she makes that comparison of, that she would like to have a white person stabbed to death. That's what she means by bleeding out. She's having to stab you to death and then say, oh, my paper cut hurts, as though somehow the deaths of any other people in this country don't matter. And it really isn't. The point of playing that is just to say we have a long way to go in this country, a lot to do to correct the just profound damage, profound harm done to this country by leftism working so hard, radical extreme leftism working so hard to convince young people privileged enough to be at Harvard to hate this country the way she does. One last quick topic. This is good news. I'm often talking about things that are just kind of so upsetting, but there's a great new book out, a surprising new book. The name of the book is Apocalypse Never: Why Environmental Alarmism Hurts Us All. The author is a former extreme radical environmentalist, Michael Schellenberger, and wrote this book. And actually, the gist of it is, and his point in writing it is, he would like to formally apologize for the climate scare. He's been a radical climate, climate alarmist. He's been flying around the world and part of all sorts of big efforts, radical leftist. And he finally woke up to truth. I'll read just a couple quick clips. This is a great, great thing. And he says, on behalf of environmentalists everywhere, I'd like to formally apologize for the climate scare we created over the last 30 years. Climate change is happening. It's just not the end of the world. It's not even our most serious environmental problem. He makes a list, a long bullet point list of corrections. Humans are not causing a sixth mass extinction. The Amazon is not the lung of the world. Climate change is not making natural disasters worse. Fires have declined 25% since the year 2003. I mean, he has point, going through basically saying that climate alarmists have lied to America over and over and over. So, last point he makes, because it might make you wonder, well, okay, here he is confessing it, which is kind of amazing. But he talks about why do all the climate alarmists, who can all see the same data, that everyone who is challenging the climate extremists, the extremist alarmists, people challenging them keep pointing out, but your predictions are always wrong, your models are always wrong, everything you said would happen, and you said 1980, 1990, and for years after year you made all these predictions, they never come true, and every time rational people based in fact try to challenge the climate alarmists, it's the same thing the left does on every other subject, the same thing we were just talking about with Nonie Darwish. The left silences opposition, silences anyone who dares question them with, accusations of racism, accusations of Islamophobia. In the case of climate, they're using race now, saying, oh yes, if you don't believe in climate change, then you're a racist, claiming that climate change somehow is different for people based on their skin color. There's never, ever, ever, until this that I'm aware of, a really solid book written by a former alarmist speaking the truth. Never do the alarmists ever acknowledge, even when you point out all the things that they claimed that were wrong, that didn't happen, that their models were false, the models were based on bad data, the model predictions never happened, it never changes them, because the goal of climate alarmists is not to fix the climate. Just like the goal of Black Lives Matter and Antifa is not to bring about racial justice. It's not. It's not to bring about the thing they claim they're seeking. It is to bring control, to bring tyranny to America, to shut down everyone who dares to argue with them. So, one last thing, I'll close with this in the show today to tell you what this guy had to say about this. He says, in the final 3 chapters of Apocalypse Never, I expose the financial, political, and ideological motivations behind the people who will never back down in claiming radical, destructive climate change is happening, we're all going to die tomorrow kind of stuff. He says these people will never back down because environmental groups have accepted hundreds of millions of dollars from fossil fuel interests. Groups motivated by anti-humanist beliefs force the World Bank to stop trying to end poverty, instead to make poverty sustainable, and status, anxiety, depression, and hostility to modern civilization are behind much of the alarmism. Once you realize how badly misinformed we have been, often by people with plainly unsavory and unhealthy motivations, it's hard not to feel duped. And as to why he never spoke up sooner, his answer, mostly because I was scared. I remained quiet about the climate disinformation campaign because I was afraid of losing friends and funding. The few times I summoned the courage to defend climate science from those who misinterpret it, I suffered harsh consequences, and so I mostly stood by and did next to nothing as my fellow environmentalists terrified the public. Friends, this is great news. I'm going to try to track down that author, see if he wants to come on and talk about it. But even if he doesn't, I encourage you to get that book. I'm going to get that book because when someone on the inside finally says, hey, this is a bunch of hogwash, it's a beautiful, wonderful thing for those of us who simply want to live life based on facts, reality, and truth. And now, my friends, as I do at the close of every show, I want to tell you why the stories we talked about today matter to you. We start out our show today talking about Seattle clearing out chopped Chaz, whatever you want to call it. This leftist mayor's attitude toward the summer of love changed after protesters at her home. They suddenly became terrorists once they attacked her home. Seattle police retake control of CHOP. Hysterical opposition ought to be clarifying for all. Same scene as police retake lawless area of Portland, Oregon. BLM Inc. is avowedly Marxist, pro-Planned Parenthood, anti-capitalist, pro-LGBT. Their platform harms the black community and every American community. Their agenda is destruction of America, not improvement. They and Antifa are engaged in an insurrection. Do not discount this. President Trump understands it. Attorney General Barr understands it. Does anyone else in D.C. understand it? Will Secretary of Defense Esper or Joint Chiefs Chairman Milley ever wake up? And as to woke Harvard, the Caucasity student, Harvard senior class student so enraged by All Lives Matter threatens to stab anyone who says it because it's so callous. Relative to her view of the extraordinarily evil treatment of blacks in America, there is no fair reading of human or American history that justifies her rage. This is the product of 4 years of Harvard propaganda and probably 12 years before that in public schools, teaching hatred of America. An otherwise bright young woman, arrogant and primed to hate and kill, rather than to work and to improve the freest and least racist country on earth. Harvard ought to be held accountable for educational malpractice, even child abuse, for fomenting such mental instability. And finally, climate advocate apologizes for the climate scare. Prominent 30-year climate activist Michael Schellenberger publishes an apology for pushing climate alarmism, points out the lies, exaggerations, and deceit. Here's a sample. Humans are not causing a sixth mass extinction. The Amazon is not the lung of the world. Climate change is not making natural disasters worse. Fires have declined 25% around the world since 2003. Carbon emissions are declining in most rich nations and have been declining in Britain, Germany, and France since the mid-1970s, and they are in the U.S. also. Has anyone seen this story of this book, this climate alarmist guy waking up and telling the truth? Have you seen this story on mainstream media? This is the danger of leftist totalitarian mind control that suppresses truth. People become sheeple, always fearful, always bowing to experts. Remind anyone of the COVID narrative and restrictions? And I'll tell you what, folks, as we wrap up today's show, tomorrow on the show we're going to have an amazing doctor who's joining us from Midland, Texas, who's going to talk about the amazing reality that we don't have to be panicked about coronavirus or COVID-19. In addition to hydroxychloroquine and the zinc treatments that we've had other doctors on talking about, this doctor has discovered another treatment that is completely healing people with COVID-19. But if you are hearing this for the first time, then you're probably not alone in this world, because very few news outlets, the powers that be in this country don't seem to want to let the American people understand that we can handle this virus without shutting down American life. And that, my friends, tune in tomorrow. That, my friends, is America Can We Talk for today, where I always talk truth about America because America matters. And I'll talk to you next time.
America, Can We Talk? Truth about America.
Can you hear?